You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Ruff.
And I'm Aviva Nebeski.
We're the hosts of the Dressage Today podcast, where you can find us talking about anything and everything dressage related. Our conversations span the world of dressage, from leading riders to local level dressage heroes. We're talking training advice, showing tips, and sharing stories to inspire your own dressage journey. So tune in, then tack up.
Welcome to the Dressage Today podcast, sponsored by Equithrive. Today, we're going to talk with Dr. Jenny Susser, a clinical psychologist, about some of the issues related to fear, burnout, and how to handle riding your horse. We kind of thought this was a wonderful topic, especially after last month when we talked with Nancy Lavoie about mindfulness and some other things. Mental health is something that we really do need to talk about in the equestrian community, especially given the past few weeks even of suicides that have been in the news. The equestrian sports are tough. They're tough because of egos. They're tough because of performance. They're tough because of competition. They're tough because we're dealing with another sentient being. So what do you think, Stephanie? Is this a theme for the month?
It is the theme for the month and for a couple of months, I think. And, and it can go all the way, like you said, from those really sad, unfortunate, extreme cases, just down to people like you and me that kind of just struggle to get through your days of when the work gets hard, or when it's, super cold and snowy in the wintertime and it's gray and it's miserable and you don't want to go outside, and and we certainly don't have any magic answers for anyone, but we thought maybe it would just be good to shed some light on some of this and have a few conversations and start some conversations, or continue conversations, and just hopefully then other people will have their own conversations.
Yeah, I've seen a lot on Facebook recently with various, individuals posting things about, how they feel,
right.
and their struggles. And, I think it's just important for us to all recognize that we're all doing the best we can, and supporting one another. Social media has made life difficult in many ways. It's made things much easier, but it's also, created an access that wasn't there before. And, the armchair warriors who comment on what they see without knowing the details can cause a lot of hurt and a lot of harm. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? So I'm excited to talk to Jenny. She's really pretty wonderful, and I think she'll have some fabulous things to say to us.
I think so too.
And certainly last month talking to Nancy was wonderful and very eye-opening about how to think about some things that maybe some of us hadn't thought about before. So listen to last month and listen today. And, hopefully we're providing a little bit of support for people who maybe aren't feeling supported right now.
Right. Because we are all here.
Yes, we are.
We are not alone. We may not be going through this specifically together, but we are going through. It's amazing how you realize a lot of times you might feel like you're alone, but you're really not. There are other people going through similar things, or it might be different, but we're all, and like you said, we're all just trying to do the best we can.
Mm-hmm. And, I just think I just think about when we spoke to Stefan Peters, a few months ago, and, we talked about nerves and show nerves and setting goals and all of that. And, here he is, we have him up on a pedestal, and you know what? He's human just like us.
Yeah.
He has those same feelings and those same insecurities. It's sort of like dressage. The basics are all there. When you get to the upper levels, it's just, more collection and fancier tricks.
But it's still the basics.
It is still absolutely the basics.
So we definitely hope you enjoyed last month's conversation, and I think you're definitely going to enjoy this month's conversation, and we'll see what that brings. for our Ask the L question. This one comes from Sasha. And she wants to know, Aviva, that when a horse anticipates a canter transition during your test and does it before the letter, say you're supposed to canter at C, but the horse canters definitely before C. She wants to know, how is that scored? And then does that affect the submission score and the collective marks?
See, this is, going back to what we were just talking about, all of these questions that we get for the Ask the L segment, none of you are alone in asking these questions. I hear these questions all the time when I'm teaching.
You're right.
So this really is not whatever. Anyway, okay, this is a really good question. It's, again, I don't know why people have to ask me such hard questions. So part of the answer to this question is it depends. So,
you know what? I think
depends.
That's the answer to all of your questions.
I think so. It depends. Are you talking about intro C, or are you talking about pre-St. George, or are you talking about second level? And is it sort of consistent throughout the test that the horse is just so incredibly sensitive and on the aids that it's just doing things, all the time, a little bit before it should be because the rider is over preparing? Or is this just one particular canter transition in the entire test?
Right.
Is it a beautiful transition that is well prepared, but we're all in the warm up and we're figuring, okay, so today my horse is a little bit behind my aids in the left lead. So I'm supposed to canter at C, but I'm afraid he might take, a second request before he does it. So I'm going to ask the first time sooner. But guess what? My horse got on the aids during the test and now I've asked and I did this beautiful transition. I'll tell you, Sasha, most judges are pretty darn good. And there is a difference between riding a beautiful transition early or late versus your horse does the transition by himself. We can tell the difference. Honestly, we really can. So if you ride a beautifully prepared transition and it's early or it's late, I'm probably going to take 0.5 off your score, but I'm going to make the comment that says, well prepared, nicely executed on the aids, early or late, whichever it happens to be. If your horse simply canters too soon or too late, and clearly, you're not involved in that decision, or your horse is behind the aids, or your horse is anticipating, I'm going to note that. And that is going to affect your submission score. What I see a lot is there is an eventing test, and I can't remember which one it is, but riders are supposed to pick up the canter at K and at F. And 98% of the riders who come down my center line pick up the canter transition through the corner.
Right.
And it's easier to pick up a canter on a corner than it is on a straight line.
Yep.
The corner prepares you for that straight line. What I say when I talk to the riders later is you cheated. The reason that this transition is at K and not in the corner is that we want to see that you can get through the corner, straighten your horse, and do that transition and continue on a straight line. This is a test of many things. So you took the easy way out. So in a situation like that, I don't necessarily, yes, I drop the score a little bit, but I don't necessarily drop the submission score. I might drop, and in eventing, there is no such score, but if it were a regular dressage score, effect of the aids.
Right.
Because to me, what that says is that the rider doesn't trust her aids to do what the test is really asking. So, again, what's the answer to the question? The answer to the question is, if you're supposed to do a canter transition at sea, you should do your canter transition at sea.
Right.
And don't do it late.
Right.
Because that's the test, and accuracy matters. However, I personally think that it's important that if you take your horse into the ring and you know that you have to canter at sea and you prepare and you know that that transition is not going to be good, you don't want to screw up your training. I personally would set my horse up to be successful and do a beautiful transition, even if it was a little bit late, because ultimately doing right by your horse is much more important than doing what the test says you need to do.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that means that you'll be able to get that canter transition at sea.
Right.
So again, long-winded answer.
Long answer for it depends.
Yes, long answer for it depends. Exactly.
No, it's another good one. You always have good answers. You always say the questions are hard, but then you always give really good answers. Thank you.
Without any really specifics. Yeah. I should be a politician, right?
Yeah. So anyway,
okay.
If anybody else has some questions, and like Aviva said, if you might think it's a stupid, silly question that everybody knows the answer to, but trust us, everybody does not know the answer to it. And if you have that question, other people have that question. So feel free to ask it and reach out to us on social media or email and ask your questions. And when we return, we'll have our conversation with Dr. Jenny Susser. Trying to choose the right supplements for the right horses often feels like a chore, and you have enough chores as it is. Fortunately, there's Equithrive, whose mission is to make this whole nutrition equation easier on you and much more beneficial to your horses. Equithrive's lineup of pelleted supplements are developed with care, backed by science, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, not to mention picky eater approved. Whether you need advanced joint care for your equine athlete, plus hoof, gut, or metabolic support, Equithrive is your one-stop shop for feed tub fortification. So stop wasting your time and money. Do your horses and yourself a favor and visit equithrive.com. Use the promo code Dressage today to get 20% off your first order, plus free and fast shipping nationwide. Dr. Jenny Susser has a PhD in clinical health psychology, specializing in sports psychology. She has been engaged in the art and science of human performance her entire life, beginning with her own athletic journey. A 4-year All-American swimmer, she served as an assistant coach at UCLA, swam on 2 national teams, and competed at the 1988 Olympic trials. After retiring from competition, Dr. Jenny shifted her focus to helping high-performing athletes in every sport. She has worked with individual athletes in the 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016 Olympic Games, and served as Team Sport Psychologist for the 2012 Olympic Dressage Team in London. Athletes aren't the only people who rely on Dr. Jenny's high-performance expertise. As a keynote speaker and corporate trainer, she has prepared leaders around the world to thrive in high-pressure environments. Dr. Jenny's seamless blend of science and research, education, experience, and intuition creates a powerful experience and remarkable results for people who are ready to accept and activate her guidance. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us on the Dressage Today podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're going to just jump right in, pun intended in a way. Your competitive athletic career was in swimming, but how did you get involved in horses, and what is your level of involvement with horses these days?
Well, so I got involved in horses. I actually was involved in horses before I was involved in swimming. I've kind of gone back and forth, but I was one of those little girls that came out of the womb trotting and cantering. And probably like every single person listening to this, it was. and I, sort of had a swimming career at the same time. And then I grew up in Pennsylvania and rode a little bit when I was a kid. And then I moved to Southern California all the way across and didn't see a horse for 20 years. And that's when I had my highly competitive swimming career. And then I was working in graduate school, and I went on one of the city slickers vacations. Now, for some people, they understand that reference, but it was a Billy Crystal movie in the, was it like in the 80s, the late 80s?
Yeah.
And they went and did a cattle drive. And I went to Wyoming and did a horse vacation. I think it was an Equithrive. And just was like, oh, I guess I won't ever not have horses in my life.
Yeah.
So that's how I got back into horses. And it just, they like potatoes. So, don't have just one.
No,
you can't have just one.
So I live in Ocala, a big farm and a bunch of horses, and so that's sort of that's my involvement now.
Yeah.
And what kind of riding do you focus on? Are you a dressage rider?
I do ride dressage, and but I mostly fart around. Can I say that on
Sure. You have fun. You enjoy your horses.
I do. I'm such an intensely competitive person that I've never competed in equestrian sport, and I was so intense as a swimmer. You know what? I'm just going to enjoy this sport hobby instead of, feeling like I have to win the national title or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Is that why you're focused on sports psychology, because of your own competitive nature?
Well, you would think, but I was a head case as an athlete, and after I retired from swimming and completed my eligibility, I was coaching at UCLA where I swam. I was the assistant, and my third season there, I was really not thinking I was a very good coach, and we started working with a sports psychologist, and I thought, well, that is something that I for sure could do. And he was so helpful with athletes who I thought were head cases. And I thought, what? And I could do this, and I could not have to get up at 4:30 every morning and make $12,000 a year full time, and help some folks. So that's why I went back. And I really did not expect to fall in love with psychology like I did, but it was just such a great fit, and I feel very grateful that my path veered in that direction.
So then how does this is, I'm sure, a very simple question, but how does
a really hard answer? Yeah.
Yeah. How does the mind affect athletic performance?
So
sum it up in 10 words or less. No.
Okay, let's see how many words this is, but it's so funny because we in Western culture, North American culture, I don't know, we separate mind and body.
Yeah.
So we look at it as if there would be a difference between the mental and the physical. And the more I learn about this, the more convinced I am that there is no difference, that we have labeled it for, really Cartesian reasons. Descartes, I could take you there, but, really, Descartes was really actually a philosopher to sort out the place for the mind and the difference between the mind and the body. He couldn't. And so he basically turned the mind over to the church and turned the body over to science, and that's why we have this separation, which we're now trying to sort of undo and put everything back together as one thing. I mean, you can't move your body without moving your mind. And every time you move your body, it moves your mind. So I don't know, how was that for deep?
That was 10 words or less. Yeah.
I follow direction well.
Yeah.
Well, tied in with that, does that mean that when you're visualizing riding, it helps you once you go into the arena? Because I know I tell my students to, before they go to bed at night, to ride the test in the arena they'll be in, and not just, enter, but go through all of the things that they need to do because the body and the mind are tied, and they've already experienced having done it a couple times before they actually do it.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice and a good explanation for it. I absolutely love mental rehearsal, and it is to me, one of the strongest tools we can have in our mental toughness, sports psychology, mind training toolbox for lots of reasons. So a lot of people call it visualization. You can call it visualization, mental imagery, mental rehearsal. Those are all sort of interchangeable vernacular. I like to call it mental rehearsal because when we use the term visualization, which is, I think, probably used so much because it's just more familiar or more recognizable, we tend to only use the visual sense. But really the gift and the power in visualization or mental imagery or mental rehearsal is when you integrate in all the different senses. I remember when I was swimming and I worked with a sports psychologist, he would ask, do you have a sensation of taste? It's not, which is, you have a mouthful of chlorinated water. So, So you did. Not so much in equestrian unless you've hit the dirt. You don't want to be visualizing anyway.
No, I don't want to visualize hitting the dirt. No.
Hitting the dirt, no. But really, it's the combination of seeing it and feeling it is where the power of mental imagery comes in. And the way that it works is that it actually helps to create neural pathways. So neural pathways, muscle memory, that's the connection between thinking something and moving the body. So everything we do starts off as a learning, right? You're a kid and you're learning to walk, and you get up and you do something and you feel something and you reinforce it and you learn it, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. That's habit. When something becomes a habit, then you don't have to think about it anymore. Our brain is really wired for habit. Because it conserves energy. Thoughts are habits. Lots of things are habits. But visualization, if you do it enough, you can create a stronger neural pathway between what you're imaging and then what you actually do. So when I was at UCLA, my sprint coach swam at the LA Olympics in '84. She was Canadian. And this is back when we used visualization mental imagery differently, but she went hardcore. She went all in, and she spent 45 minutes a day for 3 months visualizing her race at her Olympic selection trials.
Wow.
And she said that she practiced it so many times and so thoroughly mentally that the day of her race, she described it this way. She said, I didn't actually come to until I was reaching to hit the wall and swimming the exact time to the 100th of a second that I visualized.
Wow.
And made the Olympic team. To her, she had done it so many times in her mind.
Yeah.
She had the pattern, and when the time came, her body stepped right in to the existing neural pathways. She said it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of her life. And
that is incredible.
Yeah, so but it's a skill and it's a practice. So you tell them to do it the night before. I call that mental cramming.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just say, okay, you're going to do your first third level test in dressage. Just let's do the flying change for the very first time in the warm up or the night before.
Yeah.
It's cramming. So it's a practice. The more you practice it, the better the skill becomes. You become better at it. It's easier for you and the more useful and the more powerful. So any of those skills that you're, sports psychology tips, tricks, tools are things that you need to practice just as much as you need to practice your flying changes or getting your distances or your biomechanics. How was that for 10 words or less?
That was great. I was thinking as you were talking about it, I was thinking though, I guess asking how you feel it's different working with equestrians versus other sports people, because as equestrians, I can visualize and visualize and visualize riding the perfect test. But the day of, I have another sentient being that sort of it's an incredibly powerful tool. But does it work even when you're a partner?
It does. It does. And it's funny because a lot of people ask me that, is there a difference to working with riders? And because I've worked with lots of other sports, and the joke I always make is, well, it's definitely different because your tennis racket can't really kill you.
Right.
And your tennis racket isn't having a bad day or isn't sore.
Right.
Or, so yes, the combination, the partnership between a horse and rider is critical. And as a sports psychologist, that's something that I'm always working with. So yes, you can visualize and then know that whatever you're visualizing for, whether it's for a clinic or a show, that you're going to have a partner, but you know your partner well enough to know, and you've been visualizing knowing that partner already. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're visualizing yourself and then all of a sudden the horse enters the scene. It's already something that's integrated in and that you're already working with. So while you can't control that, of course, you do the best that you can. And with mental rehearsal, I always come from the place of you're always rehearsing the positive, good ride. I always get the question, should I prepare to get bucked off? Well, no, because you don't
no
fast way.
Ride for 100.
Yes. So yeah, it's definitely different, but it still works.
Yeah. Well, and then you mentioned you've worked with a lot of high-end athletes in many different disciplines, but do they struggle with a lot of the same things as, average people like Aviva and I struggle with confidence and fear and all of that?
So funny. Yes, for sure. So the thing that I always say is it is the same ice cream shop, just different flavors. Like we're all wired the same. We all have the same basic body and basic brain. And then it's kind of what you do with it. It's kind of like every car is set on a frame with 4 tires and a steering wheel and an engine of sorts. And then it's how does that get expressed? What type of strengths, weaknesses, all those different factors that play into what allows for the different types of performance. And I think that the mythology around the high performer is that they don't stress, that they don't worry, that they don't have self-doubt, and that they just walk, into an arena and they're like, I got this. I wouldn't have a job if that was the mentality.
Right. That's true.
And sometimes you do something great and then you wonder, well, did I make that happen? Athletes are so superstitious.
Yeah.
Whether they're equestrians, I think equestrians are actually a little bit less superstitious than other athletes. But, I have my game socks, or, I have my show underwear. I'm not a client. I have my show underwear. And superstitions they're all okay because really what that taps into is belief. And whatever helps you believe, I'm all for.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think that any high performer is ever bulletproof. And something can happen that can change the wiring in your mind. And then you gotta, either rewire it or find a different route with the wiring.
Well, and that leads me in. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. We're probably asking the same question. How do you help rewire somebody with fear? Like after somebody who's been bucked off or has been hurt, and that trauma of, oh my God, I'm afraid to get back on, but I want to get back on.
So I had a really interesting buck off. And I think it's really what gave me my career in fear. And when I started, and it happened a couple years into already doing sports psychology with equestrians. And so in sports psychology, we talk about the difference between fear and anxiety.
Okay.
And while they have the exact same physiology, really, the fear is your response to an actual threat. Anxiety is your response to a perceived threat.
Okay.
Mm.
I was trying to pause on that one.
Right. No. Yep. Got it. Yeah. I see
I'm
it.
trying to decide whether riding is perceived or actual.
Yeah. Well, then I usually follow that up with, everything's perceived until it's a plastic bag, and then
Right.
Yes.
right. So what happens with anxiety is, that we have thoughts that are at the source of our sympathetic nervous system or our fear response. They are originated, generated, sustained, and really sourced from our thinking. That the thinking could be based in the past, the thinking could be based in the future, and the thinking is hardly ever based in the present with anxiety. With fear, it's you're responding to something that's actually happening, actually threatening you. Now, the problem with any type of sympathetic nervous system, when you have that fight or flight reaction, it feels the same. My standard joke is, a threat is a threat is a threat, whether it's a saber-toothed tiger in the tree or an email with all caps in the subject line. Right? And you have the same physiology. Now you have different levels of it, like you get a bad email and you're not going to have the same type of heart rate, hopefully, that you would have if, a car is flying over the center divider at you, something like that. But it's really the same physiology. It's the same pathways in the body, same pathways through the brain. And so it gets really, really confusing. And you have an anxiety response frequently enough, and it begins to feel so familiar that you kind of feel like, well, I just have that. That's just part of me now. And so we get quite stuck in that. And most of the fear that we have is not originated in an actual threat. And horses are tough, right? Because, you can be really safe one second and really unsafe the next.
Right.
So there's always that to think
Yeah.
about. But the thing that I think about with fear and anxiety, and I've worked with literally over 1,000 adult amateur women. I'm in my late 50s. And I love the adult amateur women. And what happens is that when we have a fear experience that then turns into anxiety, it's because we disconnect from our skill set. So what happened to me is I was riding my wonderful, amazing schoolmaster. I mean, just like the greatest horse ever. His name was Coriel. He was a former young rider horse. He was wonderful. And I'm in my arena. It's January. I'm in New York. I just had this amazing ride. I'm chatting with one of my boarders. She's sitting on the mounting block, and I'm walking around on the buckle, and it's like mid-afternoon. Been a great day. It was warm enough that the sun melted some of the snow on the roof, and it slid off the roof.
Right.
Which, yes. Sounds like a helicopter landing, and I'm on the buckle and in the corner, and he just takes off, flying across the diagonal, bucking, big galloping, bucking, big horse. And I made it through about $5. And then I was a torpedo, and you're in the air long enough that you're going, oh man, I better let go of the reins. This is gonna hurt.
Right.
And then you hit the ground. Your butt hits, and then you're like, yeah, that hurt. Now this is gonna hurt. And then you hit your head, and you're like, yeah, oh, that hurt. And I was so afraid that I didn't want to get back on, and I was having these conversations with a friend, a trainer friend, who was like, you have to get back on. The longer you wait, the worse it is. Now, who hasn't heard that?
Right.
Yeah.
And I absolutely hate that. because there's no basis in reality, and there is absolutely no basis in science for that statement. That is folklore, mythology. And so I recovered physically, and then I thought, okay, why don't I want to get back on? And I refused to get back on. Like, I could barely stand up after I got bucked off. My horse is shaking so badly that the ground is shaking, and the trainer is pointing, get back on. And I'm like, no, no. So why? And the point would be, what if more ice slides, And then it was, you got to every day, you got to get back on, you got to get back on. And I'm like, what is going to prevent me today from happening what happened yesterday? Yeah. What's different today than yesterday? And so I started to really just work on that. And what I got to was that it was a skill set issue, because I had no skill in that moment when he took off. Plenty of people have a skill for that. Right. I didn't. In that time, I didn't. And so I went to my trainer friend and I said, help me. Like, I need help. I need a skill for this. What's the skill for this? Like, he takes off bucking. I'm on the buckle. I have no control. Like, what do I do? And so we came up with a one rein stop, and I had another horse. And so I got on him and I practiced the one rein stop on my other horse, who you could land a helicopter next to. And then my trainer got on my other horse and trained him for that. And I did it for 2 weeks. It took me 2 weeks before I felt like, okay, this is a solid enough skill for me that if something were to happen, I feel like I could actually activate it. Right. And my first ride back on him was, I think, 8 minutes, but it was 100% positive. Like, I did a lot of imagery. I really prepared for it. I got on. He was already warmed up. So I got on, I walked, I trotted, and then and I'm like, and I did. And then I practiced the one rein stop, and I practiced it both directions. Walk, trot, canter, both directions. Walk, trot, canter, boom, boom, boom. I felt so good in the moment. I was like, this is great. I got off. Yeah. And then I wanted to get back on the next day. And so then there we go. And then a couple months later, it was summer, and the big doors were open, and something happened, and he took off, bucking across the diagonal. And I was like, oh, I have a skill for that. And I did it, and I did it, and it worked. And then we went back to riding, and I was like, this is great. And it was very methodical and actually science-based. And so then I started talking. When people would come to me about fear, we would really dive in deeply with, well, what are your skills? What do you have? And then how do you make all of your decisions around your skill set? Like, people make the dumbest decisions, and I'm like, well, I probably wasn't equipped for that. Well, and you probably knew that before you wound up in the ER. Right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so that was, there was that, and then there's also the trainer who really wants their rider, their student, to feel confident. But if they're connected to their student's skill set more than the student is, then it's not helpful. It's still not a skill set. Right. So, I was doing a clinic with a Grand Prix trainer, and one of the riders was scared, and the trainer was like, you're fine, I'm right here. And I'm like, you're not, though. Yeah. And I looked at her and I said, can you swim? And she goes, not at all. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm a really good swimmer. How about you and I go, and we'll go get in some 10-foot surf, but you'll be fine because I'll be right there. And she was like, oh. Got it. So, yeah. Yeah. So fear's a tough one, but you can tackle it. It just has to be patient and methodical. Right. Yeah.
Well, and when you see a rider address her issues and, put forth the mental work, do you see a lot of changes in the horses?
I hear that there are a lot of changes in the horses. Most of the work that I do is over the phone. When I would do clinics, I would be able to see the change in the horse. But the great thing is that so any sentient being, which is technically how we technically define sentient beings, are mammals, but we're learning so much more about the reptile brain that I suspect that anything that has, that is alive is going to be considered sentient. Yeah. However, so let's talk about the mammal brain. And, really we are designed to survive in concert with other beings. And so one of my favorite neuroscientists is a woman named Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she says this great thing. She says the best thing you can do for a human being is another human being. And the worst thing you can do for a human being is another human being.
Right.
And really what she means is that we regulate off of each other. And we have so little awareness around this.
Yeah.
And that's the science behind when I'm nervous, my horse is nervous. Right? And so so we regulate off of each other. It's that thing where you meet someone and you're like, I do not like that person's energy. Right? That's that you don't regulate well together, like your clocks don't tick together. Or you meet someone and you're like, oh my God, that energy is fantastic. I really want to be around that person again, because they help you regulate. And so when we're with our horses, we're constantly regulating with each other. And the idea is who's regulating who.
There you go.
Right? And so we think that we're regulating them, or then you see the thing about my horse is my therapist, or my therapist, right? And you're like, okay, so then maybe the horse is regulating you. But there's, it's a special relationship when you, and it's also not typically immediate. Regulation can take a few minutes to sync up. And if your animal is upset, it can take them a couple of minutes to come down out of their sympathetic nervous system and then pair to your lower, calmer, more coherent regulation, or vice versa.
Right.
It's hard. You're hard pressed to find a horse that's going to calm a human down in just a moment, but they exist. It's just the other way around.
Right.
And it takes it takes a tick, it takes a minute.
Yeah. Well, changing gears just a little bit, you've worked with athletes in 4 different Olympic Games, and you were the team sport psychologist for the 2012 dressage team. What can you tell us about that experience and going to all those Olympics and just being in that environment?
Well, I tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, darn. I don't know.
Just the thing about no, I'm kidding. I'm teasing. The thing about working with the Olympic level athlete is that it is just the dream of any athlete,
Right.
And it is, when I was little and swimming, I was really young and really fast when I was really young. And when I was 7 years old, I was on a relay of a national record. And my coach told us all that we were going to be in the Olympics in 1984. And then I promptly quit swimming and didn't start again until after I watched the 84 games and was like, but that's another story. But, I can't tell you how many riders I've worked with who want to ride in the Olympics, whether or not they even have a prayer, or even enjoy it. And I've worked with a lot of people who didn't make it, and some who have, and different sports. At the U.S. Swimming Olympic selection trials, a team is typically around 50 people, and there's usually 1,000 at every trial.
Wow.
And they took 2.
Yeah.
Event. A lot of third place.
Yeah.
So it has this sort of mystical quality, the Olympics, to it. So that's what makes it kind of fun. It's also, even though people make a lot of money now as Olympian, it still has the flavor of the amateur that makes it different from, I worked in the NFL for a bit and the NBA, and did not enjoy that.
Yeah.
Because it's much more about money.
Right.
And this is 25 years ago, so there's a lot of sports psychology in those those two leagues now, whereas there wasn't hardly any when I was there. But it's that, it's kind of that dream thing. And that's what makes it really cool and really special. But the challenges are the same. They're just dressed up in flag.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess you deal with a lot more people who don't make it than the people that do make it.
Because there are a whole lot more of us who don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those
the 99.5% or more. I don't know.
It's interesting in each sport. Equestrian is subjectively judged.
Right.
Right. Swimming is in track and field. Those are objectively measured.
Yeah.
Right? You either touched the wall first or you didn't. So it makes it very different in terms of those. And so to become, in dressage, which is the one that I have the most familiarity with, there's, you get to know someone and you like them and you like the horse and there's the energy about it and you feel it. And so there's different ways that people, show their success. I went to WEG to watch in 2010. And I don't know if you remember Fuego, the little Spanish horse that got fourth. Yeah, the crowd was nuts. This was when Totalist won everything. Yeah. But Fuego's freestyle, the crowd were on their feet. We were all, we just fell so in love with him. Because he just, the energy was so incredible. So there's, so making a team and having a great ride and doing great performances there, it's always very different. And which makes it challenging as a performer, but also a little bit cool as a sports psychologist, because a lot of times when someone comes to me and they're like, I have this really hard goal, I'll always ask, well, what's the soft goal that balances that out?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to win regional championships, but what would that mean to you? Take that out of your head and put that in your heart and tell me why that then becomes, or how that then becomes important. Because we get very outcome oriented,
right?
In sport and competition, and that takes away more than half of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful way of looking at it, though. Take it out of your head, and what does it mean for your heart?
Yeah, what do we do? Otherwise we'd be playing tennis. I worked with a professional tennis player. I can't count, if they break a record, big deal. They toss it in the can, they pull the next one.
Right.
But, if you weren't absolutely madly in love with horses, you wouldn't be an equestrian. That's how I look at it.
No.
And because they can't speak, they can't communicate the same way that we can. We're constantly trying to figure out, are you enjoying this?
Right.
Is this okay for you? Is this good for you? How do I make this better for you? And how do we do this great together? And then we have those moments that just, three strides down one long side that live with you forever.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And we're constantly chasing that.
Yeah.
But I think it really helps to ground us, because, people call me and they'll be super upset. And I'm like, wait, you're telling me there's 8 awesome things that you told me and 2 kind of crappy, where, let's refocus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the last question I have for you is, sort of a scenario kind of thing, is something like you had just said, we love horses or else we wouldn't be doing this, because life with horses is hard. Long hours, hard work, and they can break your heart.
They will.
They will.
They'll break your heart.
They will. It's like you're going to fall off. You're going to get your heart broken.
All right. Well, I'm trying. I was trying to go around that, but okay, yes, they will. And if you own more than one, it'll happen more than once. So, do you have any suggestions for people that are dealing with burnout, or just who just are in this and they love it, but they start to lose sight of why they love it because it's so hard?
Yeah, how long do we have?
Yeah, right. In 10 words or less.
10 words or less, yeah. The golden key, come on.
Right. You mean there's not like a really simple solution? Jeez.
Drink a margarita, that doesn't work.
So the interesting thing about our industry, and when I came back to equestrian as an adult after having spent a bunch of years as highly competitive swimmer, I made 2 national teams as a swimmer. I made it to Olympic trials in '88. And then I worked with some very high level athletes before I became back involved in equestrian. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so, and we have this weird thing where we'll do more for our horses than we will for ourselves, thinking that's right. We have this weird sort of like all work, no play mentality, the way that the entire culture impacts burnout. That was a good one.
Yeah.
Our culture is, we're at a really big struggling point that's just continued to get worse because we haven't quite resolved it. But from a cultural standpoint, I think the horse industry is really in crisis, and we have been for a while, and we're still trying to figure out how to sort it out. But the problem is if you are energetically depleted as a human, your horse is most likely energetically depleted as a horse. Our training methods, like I remember when I came to dressage, and like this is 25 years ago, nobody warmed up well. They went right into the hard stuff. Very few people warmed down. The understanding of physiology and training, with a rotational type of periodization training. Most people don't even know what that means. If you're an athlete in any other sport, you know what that means. But we don't have that in horses yet. Eventing comes as close, but, we don't, because we're missing some critical knowledge and skills and tools around the physiology of it all. It almost always leaves us at a mentally, emotional, psychological deficit. If we can't get it right physically, we're going to have a really hard time feeling right mentally. Burnout has such a deleterious effect because whether the overwork or overstress or the under recovery is mental, emotional, physical, or psychological, it doesn't really matter. It impairs across the board. Right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter if you're physically exhausted. If you're physically exhausted, you cannot perform mentally. If you're mentally exhausted, you cannot perform physically.
Yeah.
And so we kind of have this crisis where we're trying to perform well when we are exhausted on 1, 2, 3, or even all 4 levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a challenge to try to dig out of this hole. I think that we have to find ways to take care of, I always say body first. Right? Like, if you can get your physiology better, not perfect, but better, you're giving yourself the best chance in the world to be able to think. What people don't realize is when they're upset, exhausted, depleted, burnt out, stressed, or under any type of threat, you lose cognitive capacity and executive functioning. And if you are constantly in that state, you are constantly underperforming cognitively and executively.
Mm-hmm.
That's just it's kind of like being drunk. You don't realize that you're compromised.
Right.
That's part of the problem.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So therein lies the rub. Don Tate would say, therein lies the rub. That we think we're doing okay because we have different measures for it. I'm upright. I made it to work.
Yeah.
Nobody died.
Yeah.
No, it's not really good measures. And so I always start with, your physiology first. Can you sleep a little bit more and a little bit better? Sleep is like the thing. It is the health measure. Hands down, it's the lowest hanging fruit. people, when they are stressed for time, the first thing they cut is sleep. And then, it's because it's just easiest because they think they can still perform when they are not sleeping well. But the cumulative effect of sleep deprivation is really critical. And you hydrate a little better. I think that we're getting better at hydration. Like all the different fancy mugs that are trendy, like how a mug became trendy.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm okay with that because people are drinking more water. But, and eating the right thing, like people at Barnes don't eat,
No.
Just
well, we do. We just eat poorly.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't take breaks. We don't take breaks. Like, take a break. Take a half an hour and sit down and eat lunch. And that's like people look at me with their, like I've got 3 eyes.
Right.
Yeah. But these they're simple things. They're not necessarily easy, but they're once you start to do them and you start to feel a little bit better. Once you start to feel a little bit better, then you really want to feel better. And then it becomes more encouraging, but it's like getting started on it, and because you're gonna have all of those things show up. You're gonna say, "I'm gonna take a lunch break today," and then a horse is gonna colic, or the fence is gonna break, or you're gonna run out of shavings or hay or feed, or a client's gonna be late, or the shipper, whatever it is.
Right.
Always something. So creating some type of a buffer to be adaptable with regards to how you're going to take care of yourself, I think is really important. I think that being in deficit for a very long time prevents your brain from being healthy. When your brain is prevented from being healthy, you don't think well, you don't feel well, and it's really hard to see things as different or possible, or that they could get better.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it can.
Yeah.
It's harder. It's hard to break a habit.
Right. Yeah.
So I always recommend do it as a system. Get your barn involved. Try to do it as a team, as a group, support each other. We have this crazy idea that we're supposed to be able to do everything on our own, and it just doesn't work that way. Remember, we regulate off of each other.
Yep.
If everybody's exhausted, then everybody tends to stay exhausted. But if you can start to dig each other out together, then you can regulate together and feel better.
Yeah.
This is where I get that.
Words.
Yeah, that sounds possible. I don't see it happening though.
No,
I think it's worth trying.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I think that is absolutely excellent advice and suggestion. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this was actually a very thought-provoking discussion. I found myself thinking, and I don't know about you, Aviva, but I didn't see myself in any of these situations. I don't.
Oh, no, not a single one.
No. I couldn't relate to anything. It was all such a stretch for me. But I have a feeling that, I related to a lot of it, good, bad, or otherwise. And I'm sure many of the people listening can relate as well. Because, we all are somehow involved. Most of the people I think listening to this podcast are somehow involved in horses. So there is a way to relate one way or the other.
Oh, yeah. You think the people who listen to Dressage Today podcast are involved with horses?
I would hope so. If you're not, thanks for listening.
Really.
I've been listening to mostly women tell these stories to me for 20 years.
Yeah.
So the reason why I can communicate this way is because I hear it so frequently. And while it's the same ice cream shop, there are lots of different flavors to it.
Yep.
However, there is a commonality to it. There's that, every culture has its vernacular, both physical and verbal. And, we all have our patterns in the way that we do things. And there's quite a lot about it that works. And if we can go to work on the stuff that we could make better, but we need to help each other.
Yeah,
we need to do this together. We can't do it alone.
I think that's the big thing. Yeah, that's a very big step. Definitely.
Well, it's the theme for so much today.
It is, yes.
Doing things together, and being there for one another and helping regulate.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Some very wise words, and we thank you for being willing to share your perspective and your tips and your points, and we'll all go and think about things now. We'll take a lunch break. Everybody take a break.
I love it.
Yeah, go take a break. Go put your feet in the grass for a minute. But we really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for letting me spread the good word.